Hi there everyone, my name's Ben. I've been making FoamCore inserts for a couple of years now, and they've been getting a bit of buzz online from people on Board Game Geek and whatnot. I've had a lot of people ask me my methods and how I do things and whatever, so I've decided to make a short series of videos explaining what I do and how I go about it. This series we're going to make an insert for Great Western Trail, which includes the Rails to the North expansion, and I'm just going to run through the whole sort of step from beginning to completion, everything involved along the way. This first video is going to be what I'm going to call tools of the trade. So this is the stuff that you need to get started, and also what I use for the more advanced builds that I do. So we'll just stick that to one side for now. So believe it or not, the first thing you need to make a FoamCore insert is FoamCore. I buy 5mm FoamCore. I get it from department stores. Spotlight is normally where I go, but it sometimes shows up in places like Big W or Target if you're in Australia. I exclusively use 5mm FoamCore, mostly because it's the only stuff I can find. It's nice and sturdy, and it comes in a couple of different colors. I use white or black, but I tend to use black more often because I think it looks better. So I buy it in A2 sheets, and cut it down to size from there. So FoamCore is very important. The next sort of essential thing that you're going to need is a knife. So I, believe it or not, use an incredibly cheap Stanley knife predominantly that I bought from a $2 shop. I find that these do the job. I have this one and I have another one that sort of has a thread so it locks the blade in place. These do a fine job, and they're also, you don't feel so bad when you have to continuously change the blade all the time. You want a sharp blade when you're cutting FoamCore. It really blunts knives very quickly. I do also have one of these sort of craft knives with a replaceable blade that I bought from the hardware, and this also works quite well. But I tend to mostly use this for cutting cardboard now. These are the ones I use for FoamCore just because I'm going through so many blades trying to cut everything. So knives are very important, obviously. The next thing you're going to need is a ruler. So what you want a straight edge for two reasons. One, to actually measure the components in the box to figure out how big you're going to need to cut the pieces, but also you need a straight edge to run your knife across while you're cutting. I started out with a 30mm steel rule. I do recommend using a steel rule. Plastic rulers, you'll end up nicking them with your knife, and then they're basically useless because you'll continuously have a nick where you're catching your blade. 30mm is fine. When you're using a A2 size FoamCore, I also invested in a 600mm steel rule. This is the one I use most of the time. In terms of cutting down from a full-size sheet to, say, a box size, and then when I'm doing smaller stuff, I go down to this one. I also have a 15mm small one that I use for measuring components, or when I'm trying to position pieces inside the box to set it up in the right orientation. And I also have a set square. This isn't really necessary, but I find it useful when I'm working with old scraps of FoamCore and I want to re-establish a right angle on the corner. So you need a ruler as well. The next thing you're going to need is a cutting surface. So believe it or not, looking at the state of this table, I don't actually cut on this table. I have two cutting mats. So I started with this A4 one. This was nowhere near big enough, so I went up to an A3 one. If I could find a reasonably priced A2 one, I'd probably buy an A2 one as well. These are fantastic. They're good because they've got slightly textured surface, so they stop the FoamCore from moving around while you're cutting it. They protect your table or whatever else you're cutting on, and they also make your blades last a little bit longer. They don't blunt like cutting into timber does. So a cutting surface is very important. The next thing you're going to need is glue. I do recommend buying good quality PVA glue to use on your craft projects. When I first started making inserts, I went with a very cheap PVA that I got, craft glue that I got from a discount store, and the boxes that I made with that stuff are now falling apart. You don't necessarily have to go the weather resistant, crazy, expensive PVA. I just had this in the shed when I needed it, but just standard interior wood glue from a hardware is probably the way to go. But PVA, you don't want to go for any other type of adhesive. PVA is good because it doesn't damage the foam. Some glues can cause the polystyrene to degrade and to sometimes just dissolve in front of you. So glue, and really the only other essential thing that you need is pins. So these are just flathead dressmaking pins. These are used to hold the foam board together as the glue is setting. These are, as I say, entirely essential. They can be left in the model, in the insert once it's been made, to help reinforce it, and that's totally fine. That's why I have a whole heap of them. But yeah, you definitely need some pins, and these are, again, you just buy these from craft stores. Spotlight, if you're nearby one, will have them by the metric ton. So that is sort of the basics, and really that's all you need to start, other than a well-lit flat surface to work on. Everything beyond that is just sort of stuff to help you out in other ways, or if you want to be fancy. So if you're going to go for one extra thing, I would recommend a notebook and a pencil to measure up the sizes of the pieces that you're cutting. Write it down so you've got it. The old adage of measure twice, cut once definitely applies here. And if you're measuring it, you're writing it down, you're checking it, you're making sure that it's what you've written down, and then when you're cutting it, you've got it in front of you. It helps you stop making mistakes. It also helps if you want to make another copy of the insert for someone you know down the line. And it also helps when you have people online asking you for the measurements, because you already have them ready to go. So a notepad is very useful. When you are setting the glue for your inserts, you'll want to have a weight on them to try and help the glue sort of set thoroughly and along the whole length of the joint. You can just use a phone book or a heavy book or something flat and heavy, whatever you've got. These are little pieces of steel that I stole from my wife. These were in her weighted yoga gloves, but I've got about 15 of these. These are really, really useful. They're quite hefty for how big they are. It's just steel, so they're good. I can just sit them on top of pieces that are drying just to help the glue set firmly. So weights are good. If you want to, and you are fiscally able to, and you see yourself doing a lot of these, you can invest in a set of calipers. So these are digital calipers that I picked up a while back. These are fantastic, absolutely fantastic. You can, if you're cutting a lot of pieces that are the same size, you can set this to your size, lock it in so it doesn't move, and then you can just go bang, 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 and measure what you need and do it over and over again to exactly the same size. They're very useful for when you have components in the box, measuring the size of the components. You just obviously pick it up and go like that and read it off. Mine is out of batteries at the moment, but that's what it would normally do. And they're also very good for when you're gluing internal partitions within a box, within an insert. You can use these to help you set an even spacing if you've got multiple ones. I'll show you that when we get into the actual build. Do understand though that these are not cheap. This one was, I think, I didn't get much change for $100, I'm pretty sure. But if you maybe make a couple first, and then think about getting one down the line. But they will definitely make your life easier in this, and you don't just use them for this. You can use them for other things if you're a handy person. Again, talking about things that are a bit of an investment. If you want to go a little bit over the top, I guess, this is a rabbet joiner, or a rabbet cutter. This has two blades that are set at right angles to each other, And so you take this and you run it down the side of a piece of FoamCore like that, and it basically takes out a square piece along the edge, but leaves the bottom piece of cardboard underneath. So it allows you to key two pieces of FoamCore together, which basically, instead of gluing two pieces like that where you've got one edge that's glued, you've actually got, it'll sit sort of inside there, so you'll end up with two faces, that side and that side, glued together. So it ends up with much stronger joins, and it looks much neater when it's finished. The only thing with these is they're not that easy to find. They're not too bad with the internet, but you will go through blades quite quickly. Your blades will blunt after maybe 3 box inserts or so. I mean, the blades are double-sided, so you can flip them around, but I've used this one a lot, and the last insert that I did, I absolutely ripped the FoamCore to pieces trying to use this because it's way too blunt, so I need to source some new blades for it. But these are great, and they give you a more professional look, but they also make your inserts a lot stronger, so that's something you can think about. If you want to help reinforce the joints beyond just pins, I've started using tacks, little fine-headed nail tacks. I just use these as I would a pin, but I leave them in the box when it's done. I push them right in, pop them through the outside layer of cardboard, and they really help reinforce joints. They're also very good if you have floating partitions within the middle of the box, which don't have any other support. Push them up through the bottom, and they'll hold things in place. Again, I'll explain this more when we get into the nuts and bolts of building, but these can be quite good, quite useful. I also sometimes clip the head off it with a pair of wire cutters and leave them internal to the joint of some pieces. I've done that a couple of times. I don't think it's not very necessary, but it definitely helps make them stronger. Something else that I often use are ribbons. So if I have an insert where the box space is very tight and I need to be lifting things up out of recesses, I take a ribbon, I glue it on the side of the box, I have a bit of length, cut it off so the pieces sit on top, and then I pull the ribbon and the pieces lift out. It works quite well. It can look quite good if you can be neat. And it really allows you to cram a lot into the box. I used quite a few, I've used it in quite a few of my inserts. My viticulture insert made good use of ribbons and really helped me fit a lot of stuff in a box. So these are just cheap ones that I bought from a discount store, a couple of different colors. Yeah, ribbons are pretty useful at times. Sometimes when space is at an absolute premium in a box, I have started using cardboard, thick card, so more cardstock, instead of FoamCore as bases for compartments. It just gives me a little bit of extra depth, comparatively. So unfortunately, I haven't been able to consistently source this type of cardboard. I'm just making do with what I have found in other things that I've bought, or backs of old notepads or calendars or things like that. So I've got it in a couple of different sort of qualities of card and thicknesses and rigidities. I've also used this stuff. I think I made some print and play components with this, but yeah, so thick card can be quite good. In the past, in my inserts, I tend to use quite a bit of coloured card as well. So I colour code compartments using coloured cardstock. This is just scrapbooking craft cardboard, and it's just in a whole lot of different colours. This stuff is linen finish on one side and smooth on the other. I tend to use the smooth side, but this is just something I picked up at a craft shop again. This was much cheaper than what the price indicates, but this is fantastic and it looks really good. Nice vibrant colours, gives you an easy way to pack up things when you're done, and I'll show it when we get into the actual making of the box. Because of the cardboard that I use, I tend to also reinforce when I do my curved compartment bases. I use a thinner card to line the bottom of that. So this is normally what I use for this. This is pretty thin card. I've also sometimes used what do they call it? Binding covers. So the rear covers of binding when you do ring binding. This stuff works quite well. It's just some cheap cardstock that I picked up. And the last thing that I use sometimes, only sort of rarely, is might be a bit difficult to see on the table. Sometimes I do sort of geometric shapes when I'm cutting out things, or if I do aids to help people pack things away. If I've got a box that has hexagonal shaped things or whatever, I sometimes draw it on the bottom. So this I use for that. So this is if I want a curved sort of edge, or if I want certain shapes. This one I think I used in high school, I'm pretty sure. But yeah, this one does the job. And the only other thing, which is just out of shot, but I have all of my bits and pieces in a tackle box, or in a toolbox, little plastic toolbox, which is possibly one of the most important things that I have, because of that I can just go out, grab my toolbox, grab a sheet of FoamCore, grab my cutting mat, and grab the game that I want to start working on, and I can just go straight to it. I don't have to fiddle around and try and find where everything is. The biggest barrier to getting inserts made is actually starting to make them, so that helps me remove that barrier, or at least make it smaller. Right, so that is everything that you need to make an insert. Next time we will have a look at the sort of basics of setting out the box, figuring out what the components are, how you want them to fit into the box, and how you're going to actually use the components on the table. But for now, thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.